good news. There are 800 people literally logging in today, so we won't probably see all of you. So you can feel free to not have yourself on camera or fuss about for a little bit longer. My name is Jennifer. I'm the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey, and we're just going to hang out for a couple minutes, getting everybody into the waiting room. So give us a second.
Just as everybody's settling in, hi, my name's Helen. I work with NASW New Jersey. We do have closed captioning available for this webinar today. In order to access it, if you click on the More button, and from there you'll be able to see the closed captioning.
All right, give us just one more minute. We still have a couple of people getting into the meeting. Again, welcome everyone. We're just getting situated. We have over 800 people registered for today's conversation. So a little bit of traffic getting into the room. We want to make sure everybody is on before we jump into the conversation. All right. So I think we have everyone, and we'll go ahead and get started because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're in the middle of the day. Well, I guess depends on where you are calling in from. Again, welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of NASW here in New Jersey. And I am joined today by Dr. Tawanda Hubbard, who is a licensed clinical social worker, our former president of the chapter here in New Jersey, a professor, a researcher, and a therapist. She wears multiple hats and is an expert in both race and trauma. And we are just so grateful that you're here to have this conversation with us today. These are really challenging times, and we are excited to have the conversation with you. And that's what we're really hoping today will be, a conversation, a dialogue, an opportunity to ask Dr. Hubbard questions and learn from her and to have a conversation amongst ourselves. We have over 800 people registered today, so we are going to do the best to facilitate an 800-person Zoom. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of help in doing so. First, the chat on the side, if you will, I'm sure we all know how to use Zoom chat by now. I encourage you to chat in the chat box if you are responding to something that Dr. Hubbard is saying, or your kudos, or you can relate to it. Certainly put that in the chat box. If you have a question, you can private message either myself or Helen French, who is here on the back end with us, and we'll be able to see those come through a little bit easier than if it's in the Zoom chat group with 800 comments flying around, and we'll be able to bring you on. As much as possible, I would love to see and hear from you versus chat. So if you also want to raise your hand, we can interject and bring you on so that you can ask your questions live as well. It's nice to hear from people versus just see your questions come through chat. So with that, I'm excited to see where everyone is dialing in from. So if you want to put that in the chat box, that would be lovely. I know we've got people from all over the country on. And welcome. And Dr. Hubbard, thank you so much for joining us today and leading us in this conversation. We're so grateful for your expertise, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I just echo Jennifer's sentiments. This is a timely and necessary conversation, one that I like to look at as a dialogue. And I'm thankful that NASW New Jersey sought to create this space so that we can come together as a community. And from what I'm looking at in the chat box, as an international community, to have this conversation, which is important. So my hopes is that you see me as the facilitator in this community conversation. Um, don't look to me as the sole source of what we're going to discuss today and the fruits that are going to emerge coming solely from me. This is when we talk about race and we talk about trauma and the intersectionality between the two. It is the community that will identify the resources for healing, and it's the community that needs to define the impact and what racism and trauma and the intersectionality means. And so I want everyone to feel equally contributors in this conversation that we're going to have this afternoon. So a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. So Jennifer, give us the formal title of our conversation. So how did we title this conversation?
Race through the lens of trauma.
Mm-hmm. So when I remember when I read that, race through the lens of trauma, I thought about that, and I'm not sure if you guys thought about that as well. Race through the lens of trauma. So we know race to be a social, political, and cultural construct, right? And we know that it was constructed to be able to privilege people and communities that identify as white, and to put persons and Black, Indigenous persons of color in a disadvantaged position, right? And so when I thought about that, I thought, is it race that could cause us to be traumatized the way we are socially identified by others? Most definitely. At the same time, I thought about racism. And when we look at racism and it being this system that in the United States and also in other places in our world, designed by the framers and architects to be able to advantage those who identify as white above persons of color. And that's something that we need to be clear about, that we're talking about race, we're talking about racism and what that means. And we need to have a common language in our conversation today as we explore what trauma is, right? And how we look at understanding the behaviors, the narratives that we all drink the Kool-Aid, how we've been socialized to understand race and racism. And I'm curious to know, how are you guys defining trauma? And what's the framework that you guys are utilizing when you're talking about trauma? Because that's so important, right? Because when we think about the DSM and we think about the medical models that we've all been taught, usually the problem is solely located in the person, right, is disconnected from the contextualized experiences and environment and the relationships. I will say, when we talk about trauma and the DSM and the other stress-related disorders, there is this kind of outside impact, something else impacting us that's causing us, where in the other diagnosis that doesn't exist so much. And but when I think about trauma, I think about a wound, I think about an injury. And when you're talking about racism, and the acts that we repeatedly are exposed to, um, it's a wound that's not able to heal. It's an injury that we can't recover from. And so whether you are a direct recipient of racism or you experience secondary trauma because you're bearing witness, and I love that we have technology And I love that we're able to capture barbarous and horrific acts that are done towards others. At the same time, it exposes people to bear witness more often and repeatedly to what is being done to others. And we need to really sit with this and understand this, and understand, how it's hard for people to turn off social media, the exposure and the vicarious trauma that we receive, being just witnesses of seeing what's done, and how it compounds the impact when I can identify with the person who's being victimized. It could easily have been me. It could easily have been one of my nephews, one of my brothers, right? And so I just want to hear from you guys. What do you think about some of these ideas I'm talking about, looking at trauma as a wound? Um, Dr. Renee Linklater, when you go into the indigenous literature and research, she talks about when you talk about trauma, it just means there's after effects. When we talk about intergenerational trauma, what's being passed down from one generation to the next. And also not just the pain, the suffering, but also the strength and the resilience in the way of coping, right? And I'm curious, again, what have you guys thought about this with George Floyd? When I watched the video of George Floyd, what popped in my head was, did I watch him die? Was I watching him die? And and that really struck me, and I sat with that. you know um that could have been my brother, my nephew, my father, right? And I'm watching this, and how do you speak to that pain? How do you speak where you are helpless and powerless to change a system, right? Where your people are targeted, and your people have been targeted for generations. How do you help a group of people where the system is out to get them? How do you help them heal? What do you do? What do you say? And in that moment, social workers, mental health practitioners, you get to tap in a little bit and feel the helplessness and powerlessness that that person struggles with, just a fraction of it. Because there is no one answer to this. I don't know if we even found the answer to this. But when we talk about trauma and healing, one of the things we have to think about, and when I think about Cornel West comes to mind, because he said once, um, justice is what love looks like in public, right? I'm going to repeat that. Justice is what love looks like in public. And, you know, I've had a lot of conversations to the one we're having today. And it's interesting what some people say. And I have to point out to them that, do you know that all persons of color are not equally discriminated against? And in America, there's something about Black people that we really get the brunt of it. And that's something that we need to acknowledge, right? We need to acknowledge that we live in a racialized society. We need to acknowledge that we are all racially situated. And that's not just to the United States, right? And it's something that we need to understand about how whiteness is synonymous with being human, being the standard, being the norm, right? And people who do not fit in that paradigm are looked at as inferior and subhuman. which to me is what makes it easier for the horrific acts to continue to perpetrate, because we still have this idea of blacks being inferior, people of color being inferior. And for us to have justice, for us to have public love, we need to change the narrative. We need to acknowledge the narrative. What do you guys think?
A lot of people certainly relate to what you're talking about. I'd love to have a couple of people, if you'd like to raise your hand, maybe I can take a quick scan. I'd love to hear some of your feedback. Would that be all right with you, Dr. Hubbard?
Yes. And I see something in the chat box where one is saying that we usually think of trauma as deeply disturbing emotional event, right? But the impact is being constantly triggered. Microaggressions, yes, microaggressions, most definitely. And it's not just an emotional, it's a psychological, it's a social historical, right? So we can't just solely locate it in the person. I think we have to really figure out all the ways we have been tricked and bamboozled by society to look at and define and understand stuff, because we have to take that power back and start changing things the way we understand things, because things are not just solely located in a person, they're interrelational, they're system wide. Because if we continue to just problematize the people who are victimized and limit it on an interpersonal relationship, it's like a magician who is doing magic and they're having us look in one direction when they're actually doing stuff over here. Does that make sense?
It
Right?
does.
Okay, you got some hands up.
I do. I have a lot of them, so I'm just going to move through the list. I'm going to ask Ashley, welcome. I've unmuted you. If you could just say hello and also tell us where you're from, that would be great.
Hi, everybody. I'm from Mercer County, New Jersey. I'm not a therapist. I'm a behavioral assistant, but I'm also a yoga teacher. So when I was literally just having this conversation with a friend of mine, where there's a lot of different pieces and a long haul of work that needs to be done, right? On both sides, Black and brown side, non-Black and brown. I think what it comes down to is, as mental and behavioral health workers, we have to understand the spiritual work that needs to be done, because a lot of what's being carried, a lot of what we see now with just how George Floyd triggered, right? His death triggered everything that we see now and triggered the excess change that now Black and brown people are fighting for, and that, you know, a lot of non-Black and brown people are starting to, he triggered their awareness, like, okay, am I, where do I stand? Like, am I racist? Am I not? How does this look? He triggered a lot of things, which for him to trigger something so grand means that there's a lot of spiritual work that needs to be done, because we are carrying a lot of our ancestors' hurt, their pain, their trauma, what they've lived. And even going deeper, in order for purpose to actually be revealed, spiritual transformation has to be done. So in order for the healing to take place for Black and brown people, we also have to, there's the saying where the people that hurt you are not going to come back and heal you. We have to take on that also. We have to understand as Black and brown people that, okay, we're not expecting all non-Black and brown people to come and heal us and fix us and change us. We're asking you to be a part of the change as a whole, but also we have to do our work to release what we're carrying from our ancestors, release what's being exposed, because it's all coming out now, right? You think about that one kid you have where they've just hit like that plateau and all their stuff is like oozing out. Everything is oozing out. That's where we are as a nation. Everything is oozing out, which is an indication that it's time to heal. It's time to heal businesses. It's time to heal racism in business, in the workplace, in mental health, in physical health, on all levels. It's just that time to heal. So once we understand the spiritual transformation that needs to be done collectively and individually, then individually will turn into the collective of getting that work done.
Thank you. You made some good points. I definitely do believe that, when you talk about spirituality, there's a place for that. So even me using the language of healing, it's really important to understand that, and to understand what does spirituality mean for a group and for individuals, because the definition can vary. Also, you use the language of what happened with George Floyd triggered. And I think about that, and I think there was definitely a triggering, but something about it makes me think about, this was another Black man dying, right? That's not a new phenomenon. At the hands of law enforcement, that's not new. That's been going on for generations, right? And so here it is. There's another moment in time that gets presented to us, and what are we going to do about it? Right? There's like an invitation that gets presented to us. How are we going to respond today? What are we going to do today? Are we going to do what was done in the past, or are we going to do something different today? And that's the invitation we get presented with. And something about that, I think, if we can own it and lean into it. And I believe there's a place, not just for Black and brown, but also for white people to lean into this, right? Because when we think about, you have to think about what the framers of our society set out to accomplish. And when you think about our ancestors being defined as 3/5 of a person, not fully human, there's something about how we all need to join in to how we see one another, and to be able to redefine that. And that could be, Ashley, when you talk about that spiritual process of healing and coming together. And again, there's a place for all of us in that, because I think true healing, true spiritual transformation cannot take place if we leave a group out. Right? I think it can't. And I like your language too. We cannot expect people who identify as white to like fix it, but they have to understand that they're part of the solution, right? They have to understand that and understand their place and figure that out as a community. And this is really different, because from the Western lens and perspective, it's all about autonomy and being independent. And when you do that, you can easily blame and fault find and separate. But we need different lens to understand this. We can't use, what did Audre Lorde say, the tools from the master's house to fix it. We can't use the Eurocentric lens here. We need the Afrocentric, the indigenous persons. We need different lens, Eastern lens, to come together as a community for this healing. Make sense? We have some other folks, Jennifer?
Of course we do. I am going to unmute Kimmy. Give me
Kimmy.
one.
And thank you, Ashley.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Tawanda, for leading this. I just wanted to share some thoughts. I want to piggyback on something that Ashley said, and I want to talk specifically about healing. So I am a mental health advocate. I have run a nonprofit around mental health, specifically in urban communities, and I'm also an anti-racism trainer through the Episcopal Diocese here in New Jersey. So the intersection of mental health and wellness for Black and brown communities and anti-racism is a sweet spot for me. So I was really excited about this webinar. So thank you for doing this.
Very good.
One of the things that I'm passionate about is really having folks understand what healing looks like from the perspective of anti-Black racism, because the racism that Black folks experience in this country is very different from indigenous racism and racism from other people of color. And one of the things that is born out of systemic racism is the belief, both consciously and unconsciously, directly and indirectly, that Black people are to be in service and to keep white folks in comfort. And so everything that we do centers around
Okay.
Kimmy, wait 1 second.
Joe.
There's people not muted, Jennifer.
I
I need you
know,
guys to mute your mics.
I think I'm going through the list.
Okay. I think they heard us.
All right. Sorry, Kimmy.
That's okay.
Hey, Kimmy.
So everything that we do, the way we engage with the world and the people around us is based on that, right? Because Black folks have been taught to keep white folks comfortable, because if white folks get uncomfortable, Black folks could literally be killed or incarcerated, right? And so we're in the mindset that we are supposed to be in service. And because of that, we think as Black folks that it's our job to fix this. I disagree with that. I think that white folks need to lead the charge on this because they have the most power and the most privilege to be disruptors, to be allies. I think the very first responsibility of Black folks and all people of color, but especially Black folks, is our healing and resiliency building. Because we can't be in that fight to be disruptors, to change this, like you said so beautifully, Dr. Tawanda, while we're fighting with open wounds. We just can't. And so we find ourselves struggling to be in this fight to dismantle racism because we are working at half-mast. We are literally broken, we're traumatized, right? Just looking at the disproportionate effects of COVID-19 on Black and brown communities, looking at how law enforcement was literally created to police Black and brown bodies.
Yeah.
And so people literally feel emboldened to murder Black and brown people simply because they feel like they were in a space where they did not belong. This is traumatizing behaviors that we have to actually learn how to engage with, recognize, heal from, teach our future generations to heal from it. And it's unfair to ask us to be on the front lines of dismantling racism in the social work world or anywhere else in this country if we first are not given the space, the safe space, the room to heal the continual generational trauma that we struggle with. So I get nervous when we say to white folks, we want you in this fight. White folks should be leading the fight, and they should be providing us room to continue to heal. And where we have the resiliency and the wherewithal to lead that charge with them, we should absolutely do that and pay that tax for our future generations. But it's unfair that the onus is on Black folks and people of color that we need to undo systemic racism.
Yes, Kimmy, you raised some good points. You know, I want to address a couple of the points that you raised. So definitely when you talk about comfortability, right? And so I don't know if you guys have tapped into and looked at epigenetics and this idea of how, you know, these ways of living and being kind of get passed down from generation to generation in the DNA. And so it's interesting. You guys have to check that that concept out. So when you talk about that idea of comfortability, so you know there was a time and still does exist today in some form where if a white person became uncomfortable, it was the death of a Black person. We know this very well. And so there was a way in which Black people needed to be socialized by other Black people to survive. And we still need that today. We still teach our children what it means walking while Black, driving while Black, just, you know, how Blackness is criminalized. And we have to teach that so that they can be able to survive. When you bring up, Kimmy, about white persons leading the way, I think, I think, Kimmy, and I want you to respond to this, that's not easy to do without, Black people know what it's like to be Black. They know what it's like to be under the thumb of racism and white supremacy, right? White people don't have that lived experience. They don't have it. Now, do they occupy power centers in the world and society? Yes. Do we need to do this together? Yes. But there are certain knowledges that they don't have. And, and Black people need to be in those power leadership roles to help facilitate and lead this charge. Right.
Yeah,
And you get that, Kimmy? And so I think that when we talk about healing, Black people have to define what that healing is. Too often, white people have held positions where they were defining for us.
Yes.
And so we need to have that voice, that space to define. Does that make sense, folks?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and you're absolutely correct in everything that you said. So let me clarify. When I say leading the charge, I mean in the privilege and power that white folks have, they can make changes on a larger systemic infrastructure.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
Absolutely, our voices have to be at the table, which is what I mean when I say we need to be given that space in that room to be at the table and be heard.
Yeah.
Undo the racism, the onus is on the folks who have the most power and privilege.
Yeah. And we have to do that together, Kimmy, because there is a giving space. Where do we, or is there also simultaneously a taking space? Right? A giving and a taking space. Right? Because if we're waiting for folks with power to give us space, are we going to get it? I'm just asking.
Yes. Very valid.
Right? Yeah, so we got to, it's not easy. It's not easy. And when you talk about this idea of white spaces, right? America was created to be a white space, right? When the settlers came on the land, right? Taking the land, genocided indigenous persons. And, so it was created to be this space. And, and when I think about, worldwide, when you just think about all the different spaces that have gotten conquered, right? And persons who had inhabited those spaces, genocide or enslavement, right? We have to just think about how, like I said before, what are the knowledges and the lens that we're utilizing? And we can't just use Eurocentric lenses. We have to tap into the knowledges of the folks who have had this lived experience to really guide us. So thank you, Kimmy. Who else, Jennifer? And what's going on in the chat box?
There's a lot happening in the chat box, a lot of acknowledgement, both Kimmy to what you were saying and Dr. Hubbard as well. I know this is perhaps one of the most powerful conversations I've been part of in the last couple of weeks. I think this is a fantastic dialogue to hear, where white people should be leading and where we should be falling back, and a lot of people struggling with understanding the roles right now and where we should all be. I do want to bring on Monique. So Monique, I'm going to lower your hand and unmute you. So welcome. Monique,
Jennifer,
where are you from?
Jennifer, before Monique speaks, can I just interject for a minute? I want to make sure too, just like I spoke about Blackness being criminalized, we need to understand Blackness as an idea as well as whiteness as an idea, right? So that we all can fully participate in this. So I want people to take a check and see where you're at, because we're using terminology and ideas, and I want all of us to check, because if you are rubbed the wrong way, that's an area you need to work on, because it will stop you from fully participating in this conversation. Right? Okay, let's get Monique in.
Monique,
Hi,
welcome.
Dr. Wanda and Jennifer. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. There were a couple of points that you made, as well as Kimmy made, that I could definitely get behind and understand. I'm in Dutchess County. I've been in child welfare about 14 years, and I'm part of the Race Unity Circle out here. And one of the things is that we meet with a variety of people. We're trying to address a lot of issues of racism, especially in the area of hiring in Dutchess County. One of the things that I would say is that when it comes to, as far as like responsibilities of people who are Black and brown and responsibilities of people who are not Black and brown, is that I would say that I think everybody as a whole needs to educate themselves. We don't get a full history lesson when we go to school.
No.
And if we got that full history lesson, I think a lot of the challenges of I think it would help with understanding how we got here, having an understanding of why certain things become an issue and a challenge for certain groups to deal with. Also, I think there needs to be knowledge that when as a person who is Black and brown, when you're put in a position of educating people, it's re-traumatizing. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming, especially if you're not being validated in that. And I don't know if everybody hearing the message knows how to validate that, because they have their own learning they need to do. So I think there's a certain amount of education that needs to be brought to the table before you even have the discussion. Like there's a certain amount of, like even when you're asking a question, there needs to be a certain amount of understanding that you come to the table with. I think overall, think about it when we're in class and when we're learning any type of subject. There's a certain amount of work we have to do on our own before we can participate in class.
Yes.
So it's the same thing here. And I understand what you're saying, that we need to lead the charge, they need to lead the charge. It's a very complicated mix of what is the exact formula for that to be effective. Because again, we don't want to be in a situation where, just like you mentioned, we can't ask for things to change. We have to push for things to change, because it's not uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for us. It's not uncomfortable per se for them to look for the change. They're not feeling it. They're not experiencing it in the same way we are.
Yes.
But in the same voice, there is a certain work that has to be done that they have to do as well. That someone who's not Black and brown has to do. And one of the things that I find so challenging when I'm trying to work with a lot of my kids for work, and even my own personal children, is that because they haven't gotten that education, sometimes they don't understand what I'm saying. They don't understand where I'm coming from. They don't understand why this is an issue. They don't understand about how words like mulatto and aquamarine and where those came from and what they mean, and those separations. And they don't understand how the whole thing of race, and how race used to just be Christian. It wasn't everyone white, and how there was a time that Italians and Irish became part of that group, that there was a time prior to that Irish and Italians and, poor Blacks, Africans were in the same line.
Yes.
When you go back. And I think if people heard that history and saw that there was a time that there was indentured servants before they got, slaves over here that were doing that work before slaves were brought here, I think it would allow for people to look at this in a historical place, and maybe it'll allow them to work through those emotions and to come to the table with the ability of, okay, let's do the work. If that makes sense.
No, you're making really valid points when you talk about the education that needs to be done and the work that needs to be done. It's a part of the systemic problem that we have, because the textbooks that are given to our children don't tell the complete story.
No.
Right? And so when I mentioned before, we have to go back to the way the framers and the architects of this society, what they set out to do, because our system is not broken. Our system is operating the way they designed it to operate, right? And there is an individual knowledge that people need to get. But Monique, think about it. If you're in white spaces And these white spaces, they're filled with images, right? Of Black folks and Indigenous persons and other persons of color. Just think about this for a minute. Some white people can go from the cradle to the grave and never really come in contact with people of color in certain white spaces. And so, you know, they're, work is one of the premier places that people will learn to intersect with others outside, because I know in America, I can't speak for all around the world, we still live in segregated racial community. We do, our residential neighborhoods are still very much segregated. So people, I think sometimes when people are asking us, people I identify as white are asking us questions because they don't get that information. And, when you think about, and his name is Elijah Anderson, he has this concept, the racial implicit order that he talks about, the way that this country was designed to operate around race, was to keep some blinded and some in the dark, and they can continue to drink that Kool-Aid. So I think we will need to educate others. Now, I'm not saying, because I think the point you're stressing too, Black and brown people cannot take that burden that we're going to just educate you. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of videos, a lot of spaces like this that we can come together and mix company and have conversations that are very real and honest about race. So it can't solely be on Black and brown people, but they do need to kind of understand, because think about this. If you don't get day-to-day interactions and exposure with people of color, you're left to the stereotypes and the images of the media,
And
as well as those narratives that were passed down from generation to generation.
I agree with you. I think that one of the biggest things that will help, I think, which is what you're saying as far as understanding, is having relationships that are broad, having relationships that are open, having relationships with people that are very different from yourself.
Yeah.
Because when you have a relationship with someone that's different from you, you're more inclined to try to see things through their eyes, because you have a connectedness.
Yeah.
And when I said the piece about coming to the table with a certain amount of education, what I'm saying is that I'm not saying that there's not a responsibility. What I'm saying is that in that, it's a two thing. It's like you're willing to do the education piece and the teaching piece, but you also have to do some self-care in it.
Yes. Yeah, you do.
Self-care, because it becomes overwhelming. Doing that, it becomes a very emotional, overwhelming thing. Because think about with trauma. Think about somebody restating every time they've been raped.
Yeah.
This is an example to get you to understand what that feels like.
Yeah.
It's a trauma to yourself to
well,
an extent.
Can I add this? I don't believe telling the story is re-traumatizing. It's how it's told and how it's listened to. Right?
I know exactly what you're saying.
Right. It's how it's told, and
then it can be a very traumatizing thing, because
exactly.
You're traumatized because you're not being acknowledged, even if you don't understand it in that moment. To dismiss how someone is feeling can be a very traumatizing thing, and that's what I'm saying.
Exactly. So it's how it's heard. So if I go to tell my truth to you and you can't take it, and you begin to minimize and be dismissive and invalidate me, that's re-traumatizing, right?
Exactly.
That's re-traumatizing, because our reality is our reality. Right? And so when I go to share my reality and lived experiences with you, and you can't bear that, that's what's problematic. The other thing that you brought up too is being able to hold our boards of education and our communities accountable for what it is we are teaching children.
I found out that there are states in the United States, I think someone was telling me, I think it was Kentucky, they don't get Black history. Imagine what that does to a child.
Yeah. Well, we're fighting for spaces and schools of social work to just teach a diversity class. So, right. So yeah. So when we talk about how we educate, because education is a huge institution that perpetuates the status quo, right? And so, when we talk about dismantling the racist system, when we talk about, trauma, who whose stories are being told. So did you guys see the TED Talk? It's Chamanda. She talks about the danger of the single story. Anybody see that? If you haven't seen that TED Talk, The Danger of the Single Story, you need to look that up, because she talks about how you know, how do you start a narrative? Do you start a narrative with the arrows of the Native Americans, or do you start the narrative with the European coming ashore? How do you tell the story? Who's telling the stories, right? And so when you talk about the need for the education and for the complete and the whole story, that is a danger, because it will threaten the system that's in place, right? And that's something that we need to definitely think about. And how can we challenge and become more active, and really holding our communities accountable in how they are teaching our children about race and
even
racism
Native
and our
American,
history.
yeah, Native
Hmm.
American history, African history. I think everybody's history needs to be a part of that. We
Oh,
talk
yeah,
about women's studies and what they've accomplished. I
yeah,
think that in the end of the day, we're supposed to be the whole foundation of America is based on the idea of diversity, equality for all. And I think if that is truly what we're trying to get at, the education piece has to change in order for us to move forward in the next generation to hopefully be in a better place than we are today.
yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. Jennifer, we want to create space for others.
Yeah, we actually have.
Thank you, Monique.
Thank you, Monique. We actually had a question that came in privately for me to ask. So let me just pull that up. I've got a lot of screens open. So someone says, I'm white and I want to talk to my Black friends about what's happening, but I'm worried about the impact on them as I know that they're dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
I'd love some thoughts on how I can open up this conversation while also being respectful and honoring their experience.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of being person-centered. So this is a person that you love, your friend. And so you just have to come to them and, be able to say, I'm calling to check in on you. How are you doing? And let them tell you, let them lead, and make sure, it's not about trying to take care of whiteness in the moment, but able to sit with what they have to say and hear, and no defenses, no personalizing, because it's just our reality of being in this world, that we are in this racialized world. And so, it's just coming open and honest about their well-being. And I don't know, I always believe in giving disclaimers, where I say, I don't know if I'm going to say something wrong, step on your toes, I'm not sure, right? So somebody mentioned in the chat box earlier, microaggressions, right? So whether intentionally or unintentionally, because when you step on somebody's foot by accident, it still hurts. Even though I did it by accident, it still hurts. So, just doing a disclaimer, because if this is a person that you love, a friend, I'm still worried about you. And I still want to know what you're doing, and I'm not sure. And I'm very aware of my whiteness in this moment. And so I feel like I'm being intrusive if I even come and talk to you about this. Like, I feel, but this is not about me, it's about you, and I just want to make sure you're well, and what can I do to help, and what do you need that I can stand in solidarity with you. Right?
I love that idea. Somebody says they also appreciate when their white colleagues call and check in on them.
Oh, most definitely. I do too. I've had some who called me, and I've had some who didn't. And Monique said this idea of difference and being able to recognize difference, but we as a people need to reclaim difference, because I think difference has been used in our society to divide us, and we have been socialized and educated to fear difference, to see difference as a threat, and not to be able to see the value and the beauty of where we're different and rejoice and celebrate where we are the same. And that idea again, we lack that community mindset, right? Because it's more about privileging the individual. And and that's something that we need to be mindful of. How do we see difference? That it's not a threat, it's not a danger, but to be able to come to see the beauty and the uniqueness that we bring, as well as alongside it, the sameness that we inhabit together. What do we got, Jennifer?
Yeah, thank you. I'm admitting a couple more people, so the conversation continues to grow, which is really wonderful. A lot of people, just incredibly thankful for the dialogue that's being had here. Another person messaged me and wanted to know if you have any advice or thoughts, specifically for white people who might be raising Black and brown children, especially sons, and how do we talk to our sons at different ages about experiences that we will never have.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? But again, when we talk about standing in solidarity with people that we love and recognizing what we bring to the table and we don't bring to the table, and making sure that we're connecting them with groups and support of others who can also join the conversation, I think is important. And I'm a mom, my daughter is an adult, she's 28. One of the things that I learned to do with her, that I just think it's common, I just went to join her conversation. So when she was into music I didn't understand and know, I needed to sit there and be with that. And I became the student and tell me what this is about. And I knew that there were values that I wanted her to hold, and there concerns that I had about impact on her. And so I had to listen to her perspective and what things meant to her, and just join the conversation as a co-narrator and designer with her. Does that make sense? I hope that's helpful, because, if, you're not Black, you're white. And so, hey, you got to tell me what this is. And I need to also be humble to seek those who have a better understanding and bring to the table the resources that my child needs, and be able to normalize and embrace these differences. One thing that I do want folks to recognize, though, is that you have to know, when you have children and people of color in predominantly white spaces, the emotional and psychological impact can be really huge. Right? Can be really huge, because it's, they might not be getting certain things mirrored back to them. So being able to tie them into certain circles of people who they look like and identify is really vital. Does that make sense? And that doesn't have to lessen your impact as the parent, because some people, sometimes it has an effect when it comes to you get jealous, you get envious, you feel like you're not going to matter. And I don't think that's the case, because it's even loving to connect them to that space. Does that make sense? Because Black people need some Black only spaces.
Yeah.
Because you got to talk real talk, right? And just got to be able to feel validated. And that's something that I think we need to create. Now, there was something, Jennifer, in the chat box. Somebody had said, and I think there's been more responses about, they were like, a colleague, a Black person was saying that there are white colleagues that are reaching out, and she's feeling annoyed because it's not from a space of they love her, support her. And I wonder, do you think they're reaching out because they feel like they have to, they're feeling some guilt, right? What's that about a little bit more? I don't know who that person was. If you feel comfortable sending a message directly to Jennifer about it or coming onto the mic.
I'm going to unmute Kimmy. You've got your hand raised. Oh, I'm going to unmute you.
I want to make sure I don't speak over Jennifer, though. So whoever put the question out there, if they want to respond first, I definitely want them to do that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure who that was who put that out there.
Oh, okay. Well, I did want to just jump in and speak to that, because I have felt this, and I've had several of my Black family friends and colleagues also come to me and share this with me, is that there's a difference between reaching out and saying, hey, are you okay? And I've had so many white colleagues do that on Facebook, in text message, phone call, email, and I appreciate that so much. But I've also had white folks who come to me because they want me to help them process their stuff. And that is exhausting. I'm trying to process my own trauma, watching this Black man be murdered on the national stage. I can't help you process your stuff. And there's a lot of folks who are today getting a very rude awakening, right? Like, oh my God, I've been living in a bubble. This is really going on.
Yeah.
So they're reaching out to Black folks, asking us to help them process what they're experiencing, and asking us to explain what racism is. And that, I think, is, what is annoying and frustrating. And again, because we've been conditioned to be in service, we might not even realize that that's what it is that's annoying us.
Yeah. Right? And that's a good point, Kimmy. And I would say you have to check in with your friend to know where they're at, because some people, I'm not there, right? So I know someone had asked me to do something. They asked me to fill something out. And I remember this day when I went to fill it out, my name wasn't in the box to select. It just said other. And I looked at it and I said, today I'm not another. I can't be another today. Right. And so you need to know where you at in the day, because there's some days, I don't mind talking to a white friend about what they're going through, but there are other days I'm not there. I'm not there. And I know your point you're making, Kimmy, about how we have been socialized as Black people to be in service to white folks. I know what you're saying there. And people need to, Black people and people of color need to check, where are they at? Are you available to do that and know what you're doing, not do it on autopilot? And when do you need to step away because you need self-care and you need to take care of you? And I think that that's very real and true to be able to do that, right? So I don't want us to think of it in a black or white type of perspective, but to be able to check in on yourself, because there are some days where I can't do this today. And you need to be able to recognize when you're in that space. And there are some days where you maybe can do it and you can facilitate that. Does that make sense? Right? And, I think that's really important. Thank you, Kimmy.
Thank you, Kimmy. We actually have Morgan, who the question originated from. Morgan, I'm going to ask you to unmute. If you'd like to jump in, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. I think my friend, it's kind of, she's having these people, colleagues, and just like people in her life kind of reach out to her as a Black woman with everything going on, and like checking in on her, saying like, what can I do for you? And she has told me that she feels annoyed by it because it feels like they are not reaching out of sincerity. They like weren't asking her how she was a week ago. Why are they asking now? And I think there is underlying, like, they feel like they're gonna be relieved of some guilt by reaching out, definitely getting their own secondary benefit by being like, well, I did my part. Like, I checked in on this Black person I know, so now I feel better.
Yeah. Morgan, you raise a good point. So Robin DiAngelo, she coined the term of white fragility. And when they are shouldering that kind of guilt and the defensiveness. And so That's a good point to make, because what are your intentions? And is this authentic and genuine the way you're coming at me and approaching me? And that's something that I think that persons who identify as white really need to understand, right? They need to understand, when you're approaching someone of color, do you really care about this person? What's behind your behaviors? And how is this going to come across to this person? And are you going to cause more harm than good? Right? Because I like how Robin talks about niceness is not going to undo racism. It's not, right? It's not. And so, if you really want to make a difference, let me see you be anti-racist in those business meetings when you know that white person just totally dismissed me and you call them out. Right? Because you're being an ally and you're challenging someone you hold that dominant class and position of power with. And so a black person see who does that, and then you come and check on me, that's going to feel very different. That's going to feel very different. The sincerity is going to be there. But, and black people are in a particular situation where we could be in this catch-22, because with us, do I call you out on your insincerity and you're being inauthentic? And how's that going to come back and burn me? Right? And so this is tough. And, so do we now have to just suck it up and go along with you checking on us, even though we know you're not sincere? So when we talk about trauma, right, and having to stuff it and choke down, being in service to people who identify white to make you feel better, we need to look at that. We really need to look at that, because that's an added burden. When we talk about race and talk about the intersectionality with trauma, that's an emotional load, a psychological burden that we are really tapping into. This thing goes deep. It's not easy. It's not easy to have these conversations. And for a person who is white to really try to get that and see that in a black person, what they're going through, or any other person of color, and acknowledge that, I think that's powerful. Like, if you come to me and you say, I know I haven't really talked to you about race, or, but just me as a human being bearing witness and seeing what happened to George. And when I heard about what Amy Cooper did to Christian Cooper and how she called trying to get him locked up or killed by police, and just to see Breonna Taylor get killed in her sleep, and, all the things that were said in history is in my face, like, oh my goodness, it's true. Right? And I don't know what to say, but I see you and I see your blackness, and are you okay?
Morgan, I think it's such a great conversation, a piece of the conversation to bring up, because I feel like I've seen that in my own world as well. Friends and family might be calling on my spouse now that we've never heard from. And the way that we approach that conversation is really important. And the burden that it places on others is significant.
Yeah. And I'm asking people just to be real, just to be humble, just to be real, just to start from that point where, I know I haven't, and I'm doing it now. And I hope this doesn't come across as fake and phony to you, but I just wanted to check. And it could be that I am feeling a little guilty, even though I know this was my ancestors, and, but I'm tired of being a non-racist and I want to be an anti-racist.
I love that. I love that. And it's about how you frame it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
What do you
getting
guys
a little...
think about this? Somebody has their mic unmuted. If you can mute for us.
I found it.
Thank you. What do you guys think? How some of the stuff we're talking about, you guys are bearing witness. You're in the conversation, you're listening. How are you listening? Are you listening to everything, or are you listening for? Do you have an agenda and a lens, that a filter? How are you listening?
I've got Ashley. I'm going to unmute you. Welcome back, Ashley.
Hello. So before the question that you just posed, Dr. Tawanda, the week that George Floyd was murdered, like going into that weekend, I felt so exhausted, emotionally drained, just like I couldn't even get out of bed to log in for, like, it was exhausted. And it came to me, it was like, okay, like I'm grateful the weekend is here, right? But the reason why I'm exhausted, I can't turn off. And to identify your privilege is to identify, what am I doing that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday when all of this has taken place? Am I now like, oh gosh, yes, I can turn off Facebook and log out of my page for the day, for the weekend, and just like let my hair down? Like, even being Black, I could do that, but I can't turn off being Black. I can't turn off raising my Black child. I can't turn off being the, you know, the Black person in a meeting at the table with non-Black and brown people. So it was like to identify privilege is to identify, how are you able to turn on, turn off, and what does that look like, right? And then even the question you just asked, I actually had a friend, Caucasian. It was like everything that she asked about, I turned into like her race therapist thing for like 2 weeks. And it got to a point where like I had to just not answer her phone calls. And I said to her a couple days later, I said, listen, I apologize for not answering your phone calls lately, but I'm exhausted. I said the conversations keep becoming more exhausting, because I knew that she was listening, but she was listening for points where she can say, well, I found an article that said that more white boys get killed by the cops than Black boys. And I'm just like, how are you okay saying this to me? Well, statistics show, I said, but the TV is showing you what is really happening. So we don't want to hear statistics. we don't clear, like I don't want to hear statistics because I'm working hard to not be a Black statistic. I'm working hard to make sure my son is not becoming a statistic. We don't want to hear statistics.
You know, Ashley, you bring in some good points here, and I like your language, how you're breaking this down. I wonder if we as Black people will feel comfortable enough in ourselves to be able to say to folks, you know, I see you're bleeding with this, right? And you need someone to help you figure it out. I can't be that partner with you because I'm figuring it out myself. And this is something I live with day in and day out, right? And so where I can, I will, but I can't today. And I want you to hear this, not as me saying no to you, but saying yes to me. And can you sit with that? Right? Can you honor that? Can you honor that and honor this space that I need? Because that's important. And when you talk about turn on and turn off, that is a great way for, I think, white folks to be able to get this. So it's something that you have the privilege. You can turn your TV off, you can turn your technology off, and you're still in, and you're in a certain world and space. I can never turn this off as a Black person, right? As a person of color, I can't turn it off. Right? Some people can pass who have certain features and characteristics, right? But some of us, you know, I can't pass. My skin color is what it is, right? And so, you know, but I like that language of it, turning on and turning off. And that's something to think about. And also, too, for us to be sensitive and mindful as we are approaching people, recognizing that every Black, Indigenous, and person of color has degrees of trauma in this racialized society. You just need to know that.
Right.
And so how you approach, how you talk about, own your stuff, right? Because if you don't own your stuff, you're going to take it out on a Black person and just trying to even get your needs met to try to figure out what's going on. But if you can say, I'm struggling myself with this, and I don't know, are you available to process this with me? Because I know you're processing it yourself from your racialized position, and I'm trying to process it from my racialized position. Because that white colleague you were talking about, Ashley, it just makes me think about how she was listening for and not listening to. Because when you listen for something, there's an agenda that you have, right? There's certain things you want to get, right? You need certain takeaways. We're listening to, I'm just open. I'm listening to whatever you have to give. And so she's trying to rationalize, you know, that defense mechanism. She's rationalizing, or he's rationalizing, you know, and trying to make sense of. And they don't realize that, you know, in America, Blacks are what's our population size? I know in New Jersey we're about 13% Blacks, but in America we're still in the teens as far as our population. So when you talk about us being in the teens in regards to our population size, you know, and it's disproportionate how we're so overrepresented in so many systems and spaces, especially in a negative way, right? So even if she comes back and says, well, you know, white people have this number, but you have to look at it in comparison to our population size. Does that make sense, guys? Right? You can't just throw numbers out randomly, and they need to be contextualized as well. So Ashley, just throw that back at her. Anybody else, Jennifer?
Sorry, because then she brings up like, oh, the couple of Black people who are, you know,
What, famous?
on the other side of it, right? Like, oh, well,
Yeah.
she makes this person makes good points about, you know, Black history, Black families, Black this, and she's Black. I'm like, but she doesn't speak for the whole population. So
yeah, some people, yeah, and that's something that she's just rationalizing. So, you know, you got to make a decision for your self-care what to do with that conversation. Yeah. But, you know, something to think about too is, and this is something I've been talking about in some of my intimate circles, is when we talk about history and we talk about Black people, in a lot of spaces in America, it starts off with slavery, and Black people didn't begin to exist when they came to the United States. And so telling the whole stories and the heritage and the riches, and, you know, I think I'm going back to something we were talking about as far as education. I think it will help us a lot, and I'm going back to what Monique said, to give us greater context about, you know, how to really situate and talk about the worth of Black people, right? The worth of Black people, because if I go back to Ashley and go back to what Morgan said, you can just approach me anyway because you've been socialized to see that how you can approach Black people, and the worth of Black people is distorted, right? Because you feel you can come at me and say whatever, you know, and that's not okay. So we have to check that, you know, because if I see you from a worthy position, I would approach you differently. I would talk to you differently. I would see that you matter. What do you guys think about that? Oh, we are 13% US. Somebody gave me the stats. We are 13%. Thank you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Somebody had a question, just going back to something you were speaking about a little bit earlier, that all persons of color are not equally discriminated against.
Yes.
It's critical, but they're wanting to know if you can expand on that a little bit.
Well, when we think about different groups of persons of color, right? So when you think about, I'm just going to pick on the United States. How are Native Americans seen and treated in the United States? Just think about that. Think about the reservations. Think about how do they show up in how we talk and educate our children and different spaces. I think about how the United States in America has this presence, this power, this existence, and then we have Native Americans. What is that? Right? How are they seen? How are they treated? Right? Their presence, their value, their worth, you know. Um, Yeah. And then when I think about Black people, I think about how we tend to be the scapegoats, right? We tend to be seen in a way and treated in a way where, as well as Latinx population, right? How we're seen and treated. There's like a hierarchy to this compared to Asian Americans and Indian Americans, right? There are just different ways in which people of color are seen, discriminated against. And, I think Black people are seen as inferior and inhuman and subhuman. And I think in America, Asians Americans sometimes get celebrated for being so intelligent, where Black people, there's a negative stereotype that we are stupid.